and girls. A special hello goes out to the director of media for the Boston Bruins alumni, Mr. Mark Boland. Nice to see you, Marky.
Welcome to the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast, the home of behind-the-scenes interviews, stories, and memories that celebrate the heritage of the great game of hockey. The Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast is hosted by Mark Willand.
One of the flashiest wingers in the WHA, a top goal scorer playing in his first All-Star game from the Cincinnati Stingers, number 17, Dennis Sobchuk.
This is episode 39 of the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast. Dennis Super Sobby Sobchuk was one of the greatest junior hockey players of all time, who went on to stardom in the World Hockey Association. Sobby is still a hockey legend in Regina, Saskatchewan, where he starred with the Junior Pats in the early 1970s. He played 200 games from 1971 to 1974, registering 191 goals and 225 assists. On a team that included the likes of Clark Gillies and Gregg Joly, he was named the most valuable player of the 1974 Memorial Cup. He later had his number 14 retired, and in 2018, he and Guy Lafleur were chosen as honorary captains of the MasterCard 100th edition of the Memorial Cup event. His junior career was so impressive that he became the first player to sign with a professional hockey team before leaving major junior hockey. Dennis signed a 10-year, $1 million contract with the WHA's Cincinnati Stingers in 1973. He played the 73-74 season with the Pats and was loaned to the Phoenix Roadrunners for the 74-75 season because the Stingers did not yet have an arena in which to play. Dennis was the centerpiece of the Stingers franchise, notching 44 goals and 96 points in 1976-77, while earning a spot in the 1977 WHA All-Star Game. 3 major shoulder injuries would curtail his career, but did not diminish his legend. After playing in the 1979 Avco Cup Finals with Wayne Gretzky and the Edmonton Oilers, Dennis had a brief NHL stint in Detroit before retiring in 1982. You'll enjoy Dennis's recollections of a colorful and unforgettable ride in a career that could have only happened in the 1970s. Now, let's talk classic hockey with Dennis Sobchuk. We're back on the show, and we're real excited to talk to one of the great junior hockey players of all times with the Regina Pats in the 1970s and an all-star in the World Hockey Association, a great player with the Phoenix Roadrunners, Cincinnati Stingers, and Edmonton Oilers. Number 14, Super Sobby himself, Dennis Sobchuk. Dennis, thanks so much for being with us.
No problem. It's nice to talk with you.
Dennis, growing up in Lang, Saskatchewan, you're a little bit off the beaten path of the National Hockey League, but the Regina Pats at the time of your youth would have had legends like Bill Hickey and Red Berenson, Terry Harper and Norm Bowden. Was that a team that you followed closely as a kid?
It was the team. It was probably the team in Canada. It was the oldest team put together. I think it was in 1919, and Pats, because they were on TV and sometimes they're on the radio, we always heard about them. The names you just said that were Bill Hickey was a great friend of mine, knew Terry Harper, Norm Bowden. I just spoke with him not too long ago. There's a lot of history with it, and to have played on that team now, you know, it's funny when you're young, it's kind of like a fishbowl. You're kind of caught in a swirl and you're just trying to just make a team. But looking back, it was quite an honor to play for that team.
Your brother Gene preceded you on the Pats, and I was curious how they found out about his brother Dennis and how you ended up becoming a member of the team.
Well, it's really odd how things happen in hockey. My brother had done very well with the Waving Red Wings, and they were the last year to play for the Memorial Cup. They played against Gilles, I think it was Perreault and Martin and those guys from the Montreal Canadian Juniors. So the Regina Pats were moving back into the Western Hockey League. And so they got my brother to sign with them. And when they come over, this is the oddest story, when they come over to sign my brother, the general manager, Dale Wilson, and the coach, Bob Turner, both turned to me. And I was 16, kind of a happy-go-lucky kid. And they both asked if I played hockey. And it's odd because in today's world, you know a kid from about 10 years old or 12, and here we lived, Lang, Saskatchewan, being a population of about 150 people. We were about 40 miles away from Regina, but, you still had to earn your stripes, and, you weren't just a flash in the pan. And so they were nice enough to ask me to training camp that year. I think it was just to keep the family happy, to say, hey, Gino, we'll bring your brother along too. I didn't burn it up. I was still owned actually by the Estevan Bruins, who were moving that next year. They were moving to the new Westminster area in Vancouver, Canada. And so after my brother played the 1 year, they ended up trading, I think it was 5 players for me from the Estevan Bruins, and it worked out well. As you said, we were fortunate enough. I got to play with a lot of great hockey players in Regina, and we won the national championship. So it was kind of ironic to be asking 4 years earlier if I played hockey, and then to win it all and to be part of the team.
Yeah, certainly before the days of high-tech scouting, and that is an amazing story, how just happenstance. So many times when I talk to players, especially from that era, how sometimes just luck, circumstance, conversations, things that you wouldn't even think of. Talking to Phil Muir, and he was talking about one day he was taking the bus somewhere, and somebody came up next to him and said, "Hey, do you play hockey?" And he said, "We're looking for a goalie." And that's how his goaltending career started at the age of 12. So just one of those things. So as we talked about, you had an amazing career in Regina, but of course you didn't do it alone. The team was great. I was curious. I'm curious about one of your teammates that you played all the way through. You won the Rookie of the Year, of course, in your first year. But you're also joined by a big left wing by the name of Clark Gillies. And I was curious, he had a reputation. I talked to Jerry Rollins last year, talking a little bit about the reputation that Clark Gillies had, even at that time, which certainly carried over to the NHL. What do you remember about Clark Gillies as a teammate?
Oh, he's a great guy. The whole team, our first year with Regina, we had 11 rookies. And I don't even know where they probably didn't even pick us to even not to make the playoffs or anything. But we ended up going to the 6th game of the final of the Western Hockey League that year. Talk about funny stories, Clark, and there was another guy we played against. Clark and Bobby Bourne, they were minor league baseball players at that time. They were playing, I believe, for the Mets. Yeah, they were in the A-ball somewhere in Virginia or out on New York or somewhere, and I remember when they signed Clark, he had to think about it because, he's a big catcher and he had an unbelievable arm, and, baseball was huge, and hockey, who knows, you're just starting out. But I was fortunate enough that Clark, he come over and he played on my left side. We kind of had a joking line, you had the French connection. Well, we called ourselves the Ukraine line. There was Wanchuk was my right side, Sobchuk was center, and Gilchuk was the left side. So, we grew up together, and riding the Iron Lung, the bus, the camaraderie. We just celebrated our 45th anniversary of winning it all, and we're fortunate enough that almost all of them, one person has passed on, Rick Urich, but we got together, and it was like we picked it up as if we saw each other 45 years ago, and we're still all the best of friends, and we stay in touch. Sometimes it passes by a few years, but we try to always, reunite the Pats. We realize when you're young, you don't realize how important it was. I mean, you were striving to win the Memorial Cup, but it had been 44 years prior to winning it, the Regina Pats. And here's this team with full of history, and they had only won the Memorial Cup one time. And then we win it 44 years, and they have not won it since. And so now looking back, you realize how hard, usually in junior hockey, you get 3, maybe if you're lucky, 4 years to win this cup. so we were very fortunate. We had a great team. We had that year, we had a great goaltender, Eddie Staniowski. I saw him last year. Gregg Joly, he's out in New York somewhere. He was the first-round pick by Washington that way.
Right.
I believe we only carried 19 players, and out of the 19, in the 2-3 years of their being drafted, I think all 18 of 19 got drafted. The only guy that didn't was Mike Wanchuk, and he had mononucleosis that year, and he was a small guy. And if you go back in history, the Philadelphia Flyers were kind of ruling the roost at that time, and big bullies, the Broadway bullies. And so they thought he might have been a little bit too small to play NHL, but he could fire the puck and score goals.
Yeah, and it's good to see that you guys had a chance to get together. It's remarkable when you get together with people like that, how little they've changed in some aspects. I mean, they're kind of the same people they were back then. They may look a little bit different, but basically, essentially, people say the same, and that's very encouraging to hear. Was Gillies like? One more question about Clark. Was he the intimidating presence that he ended up being in the NHL? Obviously, he was a great player, he's a Hall of Famer, but also not too many people really wanted to mess with him. I was curious if that was the case in junior.
Yeah, he ruled the roost. The worst thing you could do for Clark was wake him up. He'd cruise up and down the wing, and and then I had a good friend I grew up with was Tiger Williams, and Tiger seemed to sometimes spark Clark and wake him up. Tiger would want to fight him, and Clark you'd end up getting 2-3 goals, and it just he was such a big guy. I mean, in our time, being 6'2" or 6'3" was huge, and if you were 200 plus pounds. In today's world, I look at these guys playing today, and they're monsters.
Yes.
That I don't know how you get around. They're going to have to build new, bigger rinks or play 4 against 4 or do something because
you're right.
The ice is getting smaller and smaller. But with Clarkie, he was a true leader. He funny guy. I mean, in the dressing room, he led on the ice and off the ice. He great character, a guy that deserved. He worked hard and. Everything he got, Hall of Famer. Proud to say that I know Clark, and he 4-time Stanley Cup winner. Gosh, I mean, It just goes on and on. It just shows how tremendous he was. And if you ask Brian Trottier or any of the guys that played on the Islanders, same thing. He gave you a little bit more ice room when he was out there.
That's right. A lot of players did their best to avoid getting him upset, and those who did get him upset ended up regretting it later. You head into your last junior season, and you've got a very unique situation that had never happened before in hockey. Going into the 73-74 campaign, you had already been signed by the World Hockey Association's Cincinnati Stingers, and you played your last year of junior, nonetheless, as the Stingers didn't exist at that time, and you're still a year away from going to the WHA. So I'm curious about playing that last year. You end up going all the way. You have the great playoff. You win the Memorial Cup. We'll talk about that in a second. But what is it like stepping onto the rink against these teams? Is there any type of jealousy, envy? All of a sudden you're a highly paid pro playing junior hockey. Was there any type of backlash or anything like that from opposing teams?
I look at it now, and there was a pressure because now you had to perform every time, and I know I got benched quite a bit too. Bob Turner would get mad at me, my coach, and because expectations were high. They wanted more out of me, and sometimes being a 19-year-old, you have other things on your mind too than just playing hockey. And
right.
At that time, because I had signed, and it was distractions. Every time you went into a town to play, or they would even fly me into to Calgary to do a press conference. We were playing a game, and at that time there was Danny Gare and Rogers and different players that were going to be high draft choices. So we would talk about the NHL, and because I was signed, so. It was different, but looking back, I always say, I talked to. The funny part about it is, Mark, is that when I did sign, then I had no league to play in. In history, it's an amateur hockey league in Canada, and when I signed that pro contract, that made me a pro. Mm-hmm. So technically, I couldn't play in the Canadian amateur hockey, and so then they had to change the rules and say, okay. I didn't get paid, so that allowed me still keep my my amateur status. And it was a long year. We had a great team, as I said. We had 11 rookies that we went through 3 years of growing up. The first year we went right to the finals of the Western Hockey League, and the next year we got beat out 4 straight in the playoffs. So it was kind of a wake-up call for us that we knew we had the talent, and it was up to us to make sure that it prevailed. And there was a lot of ups and downs in that season. And one of the ups was we went to Sweden and represented Canada I think it was the Mulhern or Ahern Cup.
Mm-hmm.
And here we were juniors playing against all the pros. But it was great for me because I was playing against some of the greatest international hockey players. And so it kind of showed me that, I had to step it up and, not be that carefree. I had to, work harder and, keep my head up quite a bit more than what I did in junior. But in all, as you said, the season, it worked out great, and we did win it all.
Yeah, and you ended up winning it all against Quebec Remparts, as I recall.
Correct.
And that was a loaded team with Réal Cloutier, Jacques the Jetman Loca, Guy Chouinard, a team that could really score. And there is an anecdote that you had, or somebody had written about online, where you guys were down, I believe, 5-1, I believe, in Game 2, and rallied back to win the game. I don't know if my facts are correct, but you had an opportunity as a young leader, 19-year-old, to kind of address your team in between periods or between the game, basically just give your team a little shot of confidence there, and you guys ended up prevailing. I think you had a hat trick in the game yourself. Do you recall that game and your memories of playing a very good Quebec team in the final?
Oh, yeah. May 12th, 1974 will always be a memory of the rest of my life. Yeah, if it isn't, reporters in Regina will always call me because since they haven't won it ever since, they do that. But in your recollection is right, but just a different couple of games. Growing up, and like you were saying, we were down 5-1. That was against the Swift Current Broncos. We went against, we were playing against them for our division final or whatever, and we had the first 2 games at home. They beat us the first game in Regina, and in the second game they had us down 5-1 after 2 periods, which it didn't look good.
No.
We ended up, with 1 period left. I think we scored 6 goals and beat them 7-5 and went on and swept that series. And then we went into Calgary and swept the series after. Now that might kind of showed that we had some character on the team, because it wasn't just Dennis Sobchuk. I mean, there was Clark Gillies and there was a Glenn Burden and the Rick Urich I had mentioned, and different guys pitched in. I mean, we played with 4 lines. We had a rookie line that I feel like they got too much time because they took away from me. but they were good guys and they scored. And so then when we finally got to the Memorial Cup, you're right. We were down 3-0 the first 5 minutes of the final game, and again, didn't look good. But we knew we had the talent. Eddie Staniowski stopped everything from there on in. I was fortunate enough to get 3 goals. A rookie got a goal. Glenn Burry. I mean, everybody was pitching in, and everybody did their thing. And at the end, we were fortunate enough to, I believe, win 7-4 and be the first winners in, now 89 years for the Regina Pats. And we were actually the first team that, as CHA merged the 3 leagues together to play it for a Memorial Cup. We were the first Western Hockey League to hoist the Memorial Cup. So it was a pretty big honor, and it's still, I've got more pictures of the Memorial Cup around my office than I do of my pro. But, the camaraderie and hockey to me, I mean, I think back those 3 years with Regina and then the pro and Cincinnati, gosh, I mean, it pretty well paved the next 45 years of my life. I'm right now living in Scottsdale, Arizona for the last 10 years. My first pro team, since Cincinnati, as you mentioned, didn't have a team yet, they loaned me out to Phoenix. And I always said I was coming back. I'd never seen a place that was 100 above. Right. I recall 50 below, and when it's 50 below zero in Regina, you can't do too much. But when it's 100 above in Phoenix, you got swimming pools and you got evenings and everything else. So I've got a lot to be thankful for hockey. My wife, 40 years coming up this year, Cincinnati girl. So I look back a lot of great memories through those years, Mark.
Absolutely. You mentioned coming over to Phoenix in your first year. Again, you did a lot of unique things. Not only in junior, but you broke a lot of previous precedents. Probably 3 or 4 of them. One of which, as we mentioned, you played for the Phoenix Roadrunners while you were waiting for the Stingers to become an actual on-ice franchise in 75, 76. So prior to going to Phoenix, a couple of things I wanted to talk to you about. First of all, the Washington Capitals, who held that number 1 pick in 1974, drafted Gregg, Joly. They also would have the number 1 pick in 75. I know they tried to perhaps convince you to break that contract with Cincinnati, assuming you'd be the number 1 pick in the NHL draft. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it was. It was funny after we won the Memorial Cup, and I knew all the scouts. I mean, I had signed, and that was one of the first things we did was we announced that I signed a year previous, so nobody would go draft me foolishly or think that maybe I wasn't. So, and the Stingers, I have to say, and the friendship continues. They signed me 3 years prior to even playing for them. Right. And you really think about it, I played junior, then I played the Phoenix, then finally the third year they had a franchise. So it was. I look back now, and everything was normal back in '74. That okay, this is. But now I think about it, that here they sign a guy that they didn't really get until the third year.
Right.
So they were a young ownership. They're still good friends. This is the funny part is the other day, well, it's been a few years now, Bob Castellini, who is owner of the Cincinnati Reds, I went and saw him, and we're good friends. Bill DeWitt Jr., St. Louis Cardinals.
Right.
Here they were 32 years old or 33 when they signed me. And I always remember that, we'd even go out for some beers sometimes when the team wasn't developed yet, and they were promoting me in Cincinnati. And it was, we kind of grew up together, even though they're a little bit older, that it's nice to say and nice to tell everybody that they're good friends of mine. And, even when they traded me at one point, they called me in and they told me the situation, and it's a business. Hockey's hockey, and, they had to do what they thought was right. And, the friendship goes on. And when I go back to Cincinnati, it still feels like home yet. So it's great memories again, I tell you.
Absolutely. We have easily the number 1 WHA site on Facebook, and where WHA fans congregate. It's called WHA Hockey. And and I often do, as I said, a big fan of yours, to be sure, and I post something about Denis Sobchuk. We always get a great response from around North America, around the world, but particularly from the fans in Cincinnati who still have great memories of number 14, Denis Sobchuk. But first, as you said, you're in Phoenix. But before you went to Phoenix, did you go to camp with the 74 Summit Series WHA team for the Soviet series?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. That was like I tell you, things happen so quick, So they invited me for the summit, and so I went to camp. Had a real good camp actually, and they asked. There was Pat Price, Ron Chipperfield, and myself. And what we did was we trained with Team Canada, but for exhibition games they had an all-star team made in the juniors, the best of the juniors, to play exhibition games, and we played about 5-6 games in Brandon, Saskatoon, different locations, I think in Edmonton, and we'd play against the juniors. Just, they were pretty good players. We actually, when we played, we beat Team Canada one time, which didn't look very good, but what an experience for me. I look back, and right away, who am I sitting beside Gordie Howe, Bobby Hull, Pat Stapleton, Frank, these guys, Frank Mahovlich, I can go on and on, J.C. Tremblay. I watched these guys on TV when I'm like 8-10 years old, and it's like every Canadian boy or anybody that puts on a pair of skates has a dream of playing pro hockey, but to be next to him is like, oh God, what am I doing here? And as the 5 years developed, we become friends. I tell you, I have pictures, is me and Gordie Howe arguing with, I think it's Wally Harris,
Yes,
referee,
yes.
and I see the picture, and I'm going, that's Gordy, and Gordy's in a maze because I'm 20 and he's 40-some. He's Mr. Hockey, and I can see Wally, I can see Harris looking at me, letting me talk, and I'm going, gosh, I overseeded with Howe, but what a great experience to play with them and against them, and they did not pick me at the end, and it was sad, but I was just so tickled pink to just be part of that team and on the team picture, matter of fact.
Absolutely. So you head into Phoenix, and I was curious, Dennis, what that experience is like. The WHA, now, you've got another I get a couple of other young players, one of whom's on loan as well, John Hughes. You got Cam Connor, and you got some good veteran, old school guys, Michel Cormier's and Bob Barlow's, et cetera, Gary Kurt. So what's that experience like? You've gone now from juniors, you're now dealing with professional hockey. The WHA is a rough and tumble league at that point because the whole Flyers influence had come in, and a lot of rough guys. What's that experience like for you in year one?
Well, it was an eye opener, I'll tell you. The Minnesota Fighting Saints. I mean, gosh, you skated fast so nobody would hit you. I mean, they'd crush you. Slapshot, the movie Slapshot was a true story in the WHA. I mean, they would go crazy, but I was very fortunate, from a Gary Kurt and a Jack Norris being my two goaltenders. They were down to earth guys. Goalies are a little bit funky guys, but these two guys were, they were great guys. And then I got to play with a Jerry Odrowski and a Bobby Barlow and Howie Young. I had heard of Howie Young was on that team, and I had to look for him. I asked my brother, my brother was also signed by Cincinnati, so he come to training camp, and I remember asking, I said, where is Howie on the bench? And he says, he's sitting beside you. The guy looked like he was 39 years old, and he looked like he was 24.
Yeah, he was incredible. I don't mean to interrupt, but I was just talking to Larry Lund about Howie Young, and I always say, people always have, when I talk to people, they always have a Gordie Howe story, and if they play with Howie Young, they probably have a Howie Young story. I can't tell you on the radio. But nonetheless, he was an interesting character, to say the least, who had one of those players who had an amazing amount of talent. He had the Hollywood good looks, and his maybe off-ice discipline didn't match all that, but...
Yeah, legs that wouldn't stop. I mean, the guy could fly. I mean, one game he played, him and Shaky Walton, they kind of had a thing going against each other, and they just flew back, and it was exciting to sit on the bench and watch these guys. They both could motor, and so I was fortunate enough to play with the older guys, the younger guys. Husey and I become good friends because he had signed to Cincinnati, and there's a few other guys that I'm probably missing the names right now, but I was fortunate enough to play with. We were, I believe, they told us then, I don't know, you'd look this up in history, but the first expansion team to make playoffs. We had a coach that, Sandy Huckle, was a tough nut. And he played very defensively, and we really bought into a system. And you see that in today's hockey more and more, is that when you buy into a system and you play it, just things come together, and you can see St. Louis Boston this last NHL playoffs, unbelievable playoffs, that how they believe in a system, they believe in a coach that coaches it, because he's honest that he did it. And we were fortunate enough to play, except that we played against the Nordiques the first round, and they were loaded with talent, but it was great. And then that year, the funny part was Robbie Fittori was cut by the Phoenix Roadrunners. He was sent down to the minors with my brother.
You sent down to Tulsa. I was going to ask you, you sent down to Tulsa, and incredibly, when you look at it, so he joined you guys about 20 games in. I was going to ask you about the impact he had. I believe he was on a line with Johnny Gray and maybe Michel Cormier on the left, as I recall. I'm not sure, but actually Del Hall eventually. Maybe not that year. But nonetheless, talk a little bit about Robbie Fittori.
Well, he come back. He was sent down to Tulsa, and a fireball. But he was small, and sometimes management just see, oh gosh, we need a big guy to last the whole year. Well, I believe his wife was Wendy. She was having a baby, so he come back to Phoenix. She was still here, and I can't remember who got injured, J.C. Mignot or whatever. Somebody got injured. So Fitzy was in Phoenix, so they suited him up that night instead of calling anybody else in. And I believe he got a goal and assist or whatever. And hey, history was written from there on in. I think he won the scoring race. He was MVP. He never stopped. He never looked back. He got an opportunity, and he did the most with it. And great leader, and another guy that when you see a little guy like that just fly, it just makes the next line go harder, and the next line it just seems to perpetuate, and all of a sudden the wheel starts turning faster and faster. And we had a good team. It's just that there was a lot of other good teams that had a lot more talent. We were kind of based on kind of leftovers, but right. Sometimes leftovers, there's a little bit of spunk left in them, some of them. So, but it was a great experience. And as I mentioned earlier, that I'd never been in Phoenix, and I always said I have to come back. And I finally made it back. You have family, you have life that takes you different directions, and after 35 years, I finally made it back to Phoenix, and loving every moment.
That's great. One more question I wanted to ask you about Phoenix was the fact, kind of a silly question, but hey, it's the early 70s, right. A little bit of fashion going on. A few players wore headbands, and I looked through the Phoenix Roadrunners picture book from that year. Early season pictures have you with the headband, which I believe you discarded at some point. Talk a little bit about your fashion choice there.
Yes, I did wear one. There were a lot of fashion things that, I've been trying to hide or burn in the last few years, but I do have that picture of one of them, and I show people, and they can't believe they know I'm old now, because I tell them I didn't wear a helmet for my first 3-4 years in the WHA, of all leagues, to not wear a helmet, but you had to have the flowing hair, and that was part of all the things. It was crazy, but it was part of it. But I think I got speared probably 2-3 times every game because I was a cocky rookie, wearing a headband and that. So finally I was smart enough to figure that, maybe I don't need this headband. But the Navajo tribe here in Phoenix, I was kind of a tall, thin guy, high cheekbones. They kind of accepted me as being one of theirs. And Howie Young was part of a tribe too. He kind of lived with some of them, and they would make me beaded headbands. So I'm as an honor, I'd wear them for them, But after a few, not broken ribs, but sore ribs and sore innards, I finally got smart enough to take the headband off, and then it took me still another 3-4 years to put a helmet on. But sometimes you just grow up a little slower than others.
Well, you're just a kid, and the flowing locks end up the next year, of course, in Cincinnati, where you're really the centerpiece of the new hockey team there. It's an exciting time, really, in Cincinnati. A new arena, a young team being formed there in year one. I was curious about the atmosphere, the fan support, and how you felt after starting your career in Cincinnati. I know I always looked at it from a distance. I said this on the show before when I was talking with Blaine Stout, and when I was a kid, I lived in Massachusetts, but I got that WLW Radio 700 Andy McWilliams signal all the way up here in the Boston area. I used to always listen to the Stingers games. In fact, I have a bunch of them that I recorded as a kid. But it was an exciting time in Cincinnati, new team, and a very aggressive ownership. Talk a little bit about the early, the first year as a Cincinnati Stinger.
Well, we were totally opposite to what Cincinnati was. Cincinnati had the Cincinnati Reds. You couldn't have a mustache or a beard. You had to have hair cut above your ears. And here we come in like, hair down, beards, everything. So we were totally exactly the opposite of Cincinnati. But people the younger people especially really loved us. And the hard part was the first year was that you got to remember the Cincinnati Reds were the world champions 2 years in a row.
Right.
And sometimes if we got the front page, it had to be January the 15th or something, because they'd win the World Series in September, October. It would carry front page till Christmas time. Then we had, then you had Kenny Anderson and the Bengals, before that with Paul Brown, they would get front page. So the Stingers, we tried hard to promote, and we had a gentleman, he's a good friend. I haven't talked to him for years, John Hewig. I felt sorry for him.
Oh, yeah, right, exactly.
John was the promoter, and he did everything. Now, when I'm sure you remember WKRP,
right?
The show, Lonnie Anderson and everything else. Well, they were WKRP out of Cincinnati. Well, he did some promotions that they were off the wall. I mean, try to get people excited. We had an exciting team. We only missed the playoffs the first year, and we were very flamboyant. We were outgoing. I'd always say we'd lose a game 10-9, but that would be better than winning 1-0, because we were trying to promote hockey, and by promoting nine goals or 19 goals or 15, people went. It was exciting in Cincinnati.
Oh yeah.
Defensive hockey was not my forte. It was like, get the puck and let's go. The ice was tilted the wrong way for me coming back. I lost too much energy with coming back. But I tried to be a positive. You
weren't alone in that. That mindset,
I know.
To be sure.
I know. But I always thought, hey, there was a goalie and two defensemen. Hey, if they wanted to play defense and be a goalie, hey, God bless them. No, here they come, 5-on-3. But no, it was. I tried to be a positive player, meaning positive minus. But so Cincinnati was a hard market. But yet, we averaged probably 8 to 10, maybe. We had some sellouts. We had. It was a great brand new arena. It was exciting. We put it on. It was just a hard market. As I was saying, the Bengals, Kenny Anderson, I think, was the number one thrower. He was passer for the Bengals. So they had been set in stone, being a team in Cincinnati. The Reds were everything. I mean, you couldn't go into a store without a Red, with them not playing the ball game.
Right.
And that was my other good memories. Is I got to know the Pete Roses. I got to meet the Johnny Benches. The teams that the players that played on the other teams. And gosh, it was it's not a big city, but it just had all this championship. It had a stigma going to it that, gosh, we had to win, and maybe that was why it just didn't succeed as well as it did. But it's all the memories are only good memories out of Cincinnati.
Yeah, and I'll tell you that the 76-77 season where you score 44 goals, 96 points, but the Rick Dudley, Blaine Stoughton, Richie Duke, Ron Plum. It was a great season. You make the All-Star game. It was a lot of fun. That was the year probably that I remember most about the Cincinnati Stingers, and the future certainly looked bright for the franchise because you're winning. As you said, an exciting team playing for Terry Slater. The league, though, is starting to get a little bit unstable. And previously you've noted that, maybe the, I don't want to say, just the lack of structure or discipline in WHA compared to the NHL may not have been the best environment for a young player such as yourself. Is that the case, or could you elaborate on that?
Without a doubt, Mark. I always look back and I'm going, gosh, I kind of got away with stuff because it was the WHA and, they were trying hard just to succeed. So that, I look at the structure of a Montreal Canadiens, and I knew the coaching, and I knew and I'm going, gosh, it's probably what I needed was more discipline, and what I got was less. And when you're 20, 21, 22, you sometimes will get sidetracked and not, I joke nowadays, I say hockey got in my way sometimes, and I'm going, God, that's a terrible thing to say because it got me everything. And then, I was disc jockey one night, or I was going out with, I remember I went to a rock band show, or and it was Chicago, the rock band Chicago, and the trainer calls me and says, hey, these guys love hockey. So I end up down in the dressing room talking with them, and we go out for a few cocktails, and I'm going, gosh, what a time of my life. But I probably wasn't disciplined enough. and it probably in the long run of my career, it probably hurt me, but memories, boy, oh boy, you got a lot of memories. I got to be careful. When the other day I was telling stories, and I felt like, gosh, I got to shut up. I've been talking too much now. There's too many of them, but it's great. Like I say, I don't regret anything. The only thing I regret not going to the NHL, Mark, is their pension.
Right.
So
exactly.
I'm 65. So, the pension is about the only thing I'm going, gosh, I would, it'd been nice to be, because WHA really, I can cash mine at the Dairy Queen right now. So, that's it's not the greatest, but the memories outweigh, and, I hope the good Lord doesn't take my mind away, because it's a great stories one after another, and great camaraderie that will last forever.
Absolutely. Now, in that 76-77 season, you're going along, and I remember listening in the wee hours of the morning as Gene Peacock of the Indianapolis Racers scores in triple overtime to defeat the Stingers, and it felt like it was coinciding with something you said before. It was coinciding with the opening of the Red season. And I always felt that round, that simple round of playoffs, because everything was kind of precarious for a growing team. That round was a real setback for the franchise, followed by the NHL not accepting the team in the offseason that year. But it kind of the downfall kind of started in that 4-game sweep against the Racers, who were playing a little bit over their heads, and they'd come together under Jacques Demers at the time. And it seemed to be a real setback for the franchise. Would you agree with that?
Oh, without a doubt. I actually, Husey hit me during the not warm up, but during our practice the day before, and I got a hip pointer. So I didn't really get to play too much that series, but I still remember the puck, just the memories. They shot it in, Peacock, and it hit where the Zamboni doors open. There was a little ledge, and I think it was Caron was our goalie or whoever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I can't remember who. And the puck, he went to the other side, and the puck bounced back because it hit the lip at the Zamboni door. And Gene shot it into the empty net. It was 1-0. Then they beat us, and what happened was then they turned around, and in their knowledge of hockey, they go and they decide that Slater wouldn't be the coach, and they hired Jacques Demers. Now, Jacques is a good friend of mine, and when he coached us, but a very defensive coach.
Oh, yeah.
And when you just talked about Leduc, Dudley, we're all 40s and 50 goal scorers. They hired a defensive coach. And if you look at the start of the next year, and Jacques was a great guy, great coach. He was very successful, but he had all this talent, and he was teaching us how to play in our end. And we were all like, hey, we were trying to sell this game. And it just all started to fall apart the next year. And it wasn't Jacques' fault.
No,
it was just that, here.
It's interesting you bring that up, Dennis. It's really interesting because I look back at it from a fan's standpoint, and I'm glad you talked about this, because the off season that year, you obviously had a great team the year before, a lot of talent, and you add to that team, you shore up the goaltending a little bit, you bring in Ernie Wakely and Mike Liute, you add league MVP Robbie Fatorik, you add Pat Stapleton.
Exactly.
So now I'm saying to myself, boy, this is going to be great. This is a NHL caliber team. Watch out. And as you said, the start of the season was an absolute disaster. The attendance reflected that. It was really depressing as a fan because I was so excited about that Stinger season. And I'm sorry to cut you off, but you're just talking about the mismatch between Jacques Demers, good guy, obviously accomplished a lot as a coach, but in this situation seemed to be a complete mismatch with that Stinger talent.
Exactly, and like we talked about it later, and he just kind of he was trying so hard because that was his system, and we had to buy, like I mentioned prior about buying into a system and playing it. Well, we never bought into it, and we were trying to be offensive, and he was trying to coach defensive, and it just we weren't dominating with what we had, with all those 40 goal scorers and 50, and like you said, to have a Mike Liute and stopping the puck and Patty Stapleton. I mean, gosh, the guy, he just knew exactly how to get the puck out and do it and do the most with the least. He was 30. it was unbelievable to watch these guys. Even I think we even had John McKenzie play for us a little while, and I think I forget who folded which team. Might have been Minnesota when they folded, but but it was sad. And then then I actually got injured, and I was traded when I was injured because all of a sudden they had a big. The first game I missed, I think they call it the Birmingham Brawl.
I was going to ask you all about the Thanksgiving massacre. You missed that game.
Thanksgiving, and I got injured the night before. I broke a bone in my wrist, and the team went on to Birmingham, and things just kind of fell apart. They got beat up in Birmingham. They didn't have very many tough guys, and so then all of a sudden the masterminds upstairs in hockey, and I'm not talking about the ownership, I'm talking about the people that make the decision, decided that they had to start bringing in tough guys like, I hate to, Stewie's a great guy. Stewie was a great guy, but they brought in I've just lost his name. He was suspended from the IHL.
Willie Trognitz.
For life. Yeah. So they started bringing in every tough guy they could.
Bruce Gregg, Alf Handerhand.
Yeah. Yeah. And all of a sudden, then I got traded. It was like that. Butch Deadmarsh was one of the guys they flipped for me. And so then they went from one extreme to the other extreme, and then history shows that it just lost all momentum, and
it did.
They eventually decided not to go.
Yeah, I look back at the 77-78 season as a miserable one, and the WHA, the league had gone, with Birmingham, as you noted, the Stingers followed suit, bringing up 4 or 5 tough guys, and all of a sudden, the Dennis Sobchuks and Richie Ledukes and Blaine Stoutons are off elsewhere, and it was really a shame. You talked about injuries. You end up with the Edmonton Oilers, of course, in 77-78, and you talked about how it was a business decision on the Stingers' part. But I wanted to talk to you about something that's kind of like a mystery to me that I've heard about over the years. When you went to Edmonton, you end up getting what people described as one of the most severe shoulder injuries they've ever seen. I believe the trainer said. What are the circumstances is that the case that happened while you were in Edmonton?
Yeah, I played. It was my third game with him. I got a hat trick, I think, the first game. And I was flying after I come off the injury, and it was going. We went into Houston, and I got nailed against the boards, and it shattered my clavicle. And not knowing it, they pieced it back together, and I ended up playing in the playoffs that year. But all of a sudden, there was, the injury just kind of takes you down one step.
Right.
And the next 3 years, I had 3 shoulder operations, and with Detroit, they finally decided, because it was shattered so bad, they removed 6 or 8 inches of my clavicle.
Wow.
And I always remember, I know you can feel it coming, and then you can feel the edge. And I always remember asking the doctor, gosh, isn't that going to hurt if you hit somebody with your shoulder? He says, yeah. And I'm going, oh God,
Right.
And I look at the demise of my career, and I go, gosh, it after 3 shoulder operations and trying to get back at it, it just took the heart out of me. And I ended up going to Switzerland for 1 year. Big ice there, Mark. Big ice there. I ended up, and then I played 2 years in Innsbruck, Austria, where it was the Olympic ice. So I kind of had it all together again, and of all. I'm sorry I'm getting off track here, but of all things, I come back from Austria. Who calls me but Jacques Demers?
Right.
He's coaching Fredericton. Yeah. And end up with the Nordiques before I'm done. But the life of playing hockey and the desire and the wanting it had started to dwindle. And I always said, if I can get out healthy, which I thought I still was healthy. My knees were good. Everything was good, that I could time to probably leave, and get out of the game before, you see a lot of guys trying to come back and bad knees and bad, it just wasn't worth it. But like I say, I got no bad memories. It's just a way of life in hockey.
Right. I wanted to ask you about a couple players that last year in Edmonton. The team goes to the finals and eventually loses to the Winnipeg Jets. And first of all, again, thank you for spending so much time with us here. We just have a couple more questions for you. Really appreciate it.
That's okay.
I wanted to ask you about, obviously, early in the season is a very a very famous picture of yourself and young Wayne Gretzky, and I believe Eddie Walsh and Brett Callaghan with the birthday cake. But talk about when this kid shows up from Indianapolis, Wayne Gretzky. What was your impression of him, and what was it like watching him as a 17, 18-year-old kid?
My recall now, I always say, try to hit a feather in flight. Mm-hmm. When a feather is just floating down, your fist will catch the feather, but at the point of your fist stop, and the feather just keeps going. and Gretz was like that. He could go laterally, and the guy would be taking him out, and eventually the guy had no more energy to take him out, and Gretz would keep going, but he wouldn't lose speed. And he had that uncanny of getting to the puck would follow him, and everybody always says that, but that's a good sign of a good hockey player, is that he'd let go of the puck, but he'd get it back, and it was like a magnet. And he wasn't the greatest hockey player at 17, 18, but he was good. And at 18, and he just had that. There was something about him that you knew. And then, well, history says it all. I have one program. They don't remember Dennis Sobchuk too much around the world. So I always will say, well, I played with Gretzky, and in December of 78 or 9, it was December, I was in the scoring stats of the Edmonton Oilers. He had 1 point more than me. So you don't put Dennis Sobchuk and Wayne Gretzky in the same sentence at the same time, because how great he was, like that. Mm-hmm. But I'll show people, I'll go, see, he only had 1 point more than me.
That's right.
He ended up with 10,000 more than me after the end, but, that don't count. That picture is worth a million words.
That's right.
Like that. But he had an unbelievable knack of just handling the puck, and history tells the story now. You can't use enough words about him. How can a guy get 90 goals? How can a guy get do this over year and year? Now he did have a guy with him that that has passed on that did give him a little bit more ice room, Dave Semenko.
Right.
But Gretz didn't need it. But it always is nice to have somebody out there in case there was one lunatic out there that would try to make a name for himself and maybe try to run Gretz.
Absolutely.
And they would have to go through Sammy before they got to Gretz. But when you talk, as you're just saying, I spoke of Gordie Howe, Bobby Hall, Team Canada, and then at the same breath, in the same interview, I can talk of Wayne Gretzky.
Right.
And I'm going, wow, it amazes me when I'm sitting there. I'm going, gosh, and everybody's looking, how old are you?
Right.
You played with Gordie Howe, and then you played with Wayne Gretzky, and like that. So it's a huge honor for me to even be on the radio with you, Mark, because I love to tell the stories, because it's part of the history of hockey, of how the two leagues come together, and how these guys, Wayne Gretzky was actually a Indianapolis racer first,
Absolutely.
WHA guy. So
that's right.
So yeah, but yeah.
It was a unique time in hockey history. I wanted to ask you, here in Massachusetts, I'm involved with the Boston Bruins alumni, and not too long ago, we did we were involved in the Ace Bailey Foundation dinner up here, and I was curious. I wanted to ask you about a couple of guys who are no longer with us. The first being Ace Bailey. What are your recollections of Ace?
Ace was hilarious. Ace, I'll tell you, here's a good story. I was playing for the state. This is unbelievable. And he was my roommate later in Edmonton a couple of times. But where we're talking, anyways, like that. He was playing for the Washington Capitals. And the Stingers and the Capitals, we played an exhibition game in Washington. It was the WHA, NHL. They were starting to try to play exhibition games back and forth at the prior season. And we were up 3-2, and they pulled their goalie. And I got the puck at center ice, and I took off for the empty net, and all of a sudden this arm come out from the bench, and I did a 360 around. I just did a flip. He just come and stuck his arm out. I never knew for maybe 7 years later it was Ace. He saw the empty net. He like that. So the only thing he could do from the bench was put his arm out, And that's the kind of character he was. He was a leader off the ice, but in those days in the WHA, we had an unbelievable amount of characters in Edmonton. From, like I'm saying, Gretzky with the talent and everything else, but from a Cowboy Fled, Hamilton, guys, Ace Bailey, Nielsen for Rangers for years, and then you had Davy Dryden, that he was quiet and big man, but it was unbelievable, a lot of talent, a lot of character.
Steve Carlson too.
Stevie Carlson, yeah, I know. And, it's funny how I tell people I played with Slapshot guys. And I tell them the real story that it wasn't the Hanson brothers, it was really the Carlsons, but it was Hanson that took Jack Carlson's place. And, Paul Newman walked in the room one day when we were in Quebec. He was, I think him and Pockington, the owner of Edmonton, had race boats together or something like that, I think. And so he comes in the dressing room. So it was a funny time. It was a great time in our lives.
It sure was interesting, that's for sure. And I wanted to ask you one more guy. You mentioned him, and I wanted to get your memories of a guy that I was always fascinated with, a very colorful guy, Cowboy Bill Flett. What type of a guy was Bill Flett?
He was a cowboy. He truly was. He wasn't a facade or anything. He was from Okotoks, I think. He was from somewhere in south of Calgary. He traded horses. He just was a cowboy all around. I can see when the Philadelphia Flyers won with all their characters, and he was a character. Part of it that it takes that's when you look at a winning team and you look at, not just the talent, but what they have off the ice and in the dressing room. That's always a big thing. And like we mentioned Clark Gillies. Clarky got traded to Buffalo later. And every team wants to have a player that won a Stanley Cup on it so that they can rub off that character of what it takes. Mm-hmm. And it made all, and Cowboy was one of those guys that, he played his game. He always got his goals, got his points, he was a good guy. Sometimes you wouldn't even know he was out on the ice and he might get a goal and 2 assists.
Right.
He did the most. He was that experienced, and he's no longer with us, and it's sad. I was also fortunate enough to another guy that was playing for us was Bill Goldsworthy.
Oh, right, exactly,
Goldie was Goldie was with us, and he was another character. And I look back, and I think the WHA really was a character league, not a hockey league sometimes. I think there's one guy I haven't said, and at the same time I joke, I go, gosh, if you read his book, the reason he played the NHL was because he beat me up. Mark Messier.
Right. Mark Messier.
Mark played for the Stingers.
Right.
And Mark and I played. We had a fight at the end, and I got 5 for receiving, and he got 5 for giving. And my wife. That's what my wife told me. I thought I held my own. But if you read his book, and Glenn Sather always said that when they drafted Mark Messier, they drafted him because he beat the crap out of me so bad. And I'm going, well, there's 2 ways of looking at that. Is that, am I a fighter that he beat up a good fighter? Mm-hmm. Or, I don't know the other way. But anyways, Mess and we took joke. Somebody just sent me a picture no more than a week ago, saying, hey, do you want me to get Messier back? They were playing golf. Oh. Him and Mess were playing. And so here I am talking to you, Mark, and at the same time, Gordy's gone, but to say the names of the 2 all-time hockey in NHL, Wayne Gretzky and Mark Messier, and then to also say Bobby Hull, Gordie Howe, Frank, to me it's I'm in amazement that it's kind of like I look back and it's a third person that I can tell the stories about him because it's me, but I can't believe it was me. So
it is. And speaking of that too, in 2016, I believe MasterCard honored the great junior players of all time. Were you in junior teams? I believe you were honorary captain along with no less than Don Cherry and Guy Lafleur. So
unbelievable.
Again, you are alongside some of the all-time most notable hockey players, to be sure.
We did it was the 100th year last year for the Memorial Cup, and so being in Regina, I think that's the only reason they asked me, because I was the last captain or the last guy to raise it. But Guy and I, we played against each other, and we also played some alumni games together. So we kind of knew each other. But I'm kind of standing beside one of the all-time greatest hockey players, and we're just sitting there in the bar having a few drinks, and we come out of a stage, in front of 30,000 people. The Eagles were playing that night in Regina, and we were at the football stadium, and I'm going, gosh, 30,000. Well, in Regina they did know me because I'm a Pat, but if they watched TV, they were wondering, who's the guy on the left? There's Guy Lafleur, but who's this other guy? But that was pretty proud. It was like, it was an honor. It was probably the biggest honor of my life. In 100 years, they brought one guy back. Two guys back. Guy Lafleur, Terry was there broadcasting that, but they brought Guy back from the east, and they brought me for the west. And I'm going, holy smokes. So when I think of hockey, Mark, I can't say enough for it. And when you ask me, you never ask me enough questions, because I'll probably have other stories I could have told you, and I just forgot because I got too many of them.
Oh, I know. That's a good problem for me to have too. It's real quickly, when you end up your Flyers property, you end up with Detroit that first year. Now, a lot of ex-WHA players on that team: Netamansky, LeBratton, Barry Long, George Lyle. I was enthused about it for your sake, because Bobby Crom was the coach, so he understood you and your style. Unfortunately, as you noted, the shoulder injuries were only getting worse. Can you talk about, just in general, that first year in the NHL with the Detroit Red Wings?
It was. I joke now. We were the Dead Wings. When you look at it, because everybody was kind of past their time, and it was sad because we had Earl Thompson, 50-goal scorer for Toronto Maple Leafs. We had Peter Mahovlich. Oh God. Character. He should have been in the WHA
right.
Because he had more character, and I knew Longy, and I knew, there was the Swedes and the Brattons, and I even knew Dennis Plonage from Flin Flon. He was there, and it just, Greg Joly had played with me in Regina, and so it was great. But we just, I don't know why, we just, with all that talent, but I think time had passed us by,
right?
And it just, they were trying, and we hear. I joke now all the time is that, they're going to go with youth, because we were all like 30 and they were going with age, and we pretty well proved that you can't do it with age,
right.
With all these young legs coming up. But it was a great experience. The only thing I can put my hat on in the NHL was that I scored the first Detroit Red Wing goal in Joe Louis, but that's worth nothing now, because Joe Louis is gone already.
Right, I did that.
That's really telling you're getting.
That's true. Actually, I just found a clip of you scoring, and I think it was against Minnesota. I have a clip. I'll send it to you. Just, it was a nice play, beating defense, burst of speed, breaking in and scoring. But nonetheless, so. You go to Europe, you tear it up, big numbers, as you said. You realized it was time for you to retire. You had already met, of course, your wife. I was curious, Dennis, those first years out of hockey. I know you knew it was time to retire for the reasons you've stated, but hockey's been such a huge part of your life up until that point. What's the adjustment like? What did you do right away to get settled into a normal working life?
It was twofold easy for me. Number one was I had purchased a farm with my brother. My dad was a farmer, so that took my mind off of hockey for the summer months, of being the farmer. Number two is, when I left hockey, I left the game, but I missed the guys. The camaraderie in hockey is you're on a bus, an airplane, you're doing, you really become brothers, and and you live together, and and you just have so many memories. So I missed that more than anything. The game itself, and with 3 injuries, I kind of knew that it was time, and I always kind of made a pact with myself that when the time comes, I didn't want to be one of those old guys that were trying to come back and struggling and looking like a newborn giraffe out on the ice flipping, that you just, oh gosh, everybody say, oh, please quit, like that.
Right.
And I thought it was good to leave. It was tough. It was always tough. I ended up, this is kind of odd, because I lived in a town of 150 people. My brother was now retired fireman, and he was playing for a little town of 500. And they kept on coming and asking me, "Come on, play." And I go, "No way, I'm done, finished." So then they asked if I would coach. So I told my coach. So we ended up with 6 players one time. We had a snowstorm, so I had to put the equipment on, and we ended up playing. And it was fun. We won the Saskatchewan whatever division it was, and it was kind of fun because the game was fun again. It was still, and that's what I missed more was that kid. It's a kid's game, and when it becomes a business, all of a sudden, gosh. It's tough when you treat it as a business and today, with the dollars, and I won't say they paid me good, and I was always happy what they paid me. I was very, very lucky that what I got, but it becomes a business really quick, and when expectations start, then all of a sudden it wasn't a kid's game anymore, and you didn't have that kid's desire of just going out there and having fun and scoring goals. It was like, gosh, I didn't get a goal. Geez, and the pressure starts adding on a little different. But I thought it was fairly easy. I got Bill Hickey was the owner of the Regina Pats when he asked me to be the assistant coach, and then he asked me I was head coach, and then I stepped down and I become the general manager. But again, I was in a game that, I couldn't control the outcome. I was on the bench. Now, you kind of control it with your systems, but I was in tune to, hey, if we're down a goal, put me out there, and I'll try to get that goal for you. When you're down a goal as a coach, and I didn't enjoy it as much as I really wanted to enjoy it. So I stepped down from them. They asked, and, I still love hockey. Phoenix, living in Phoenix, it's sad, but, it's not the number one thing here. They got the Diamondbacks baseball, and they got the Cardinals, and hockey takes kind of a third seat, similar to Cincinnati. The other day I just talked to Shane Doan. He was at a golf course, and I work at a golf course, and I used to hockey, as I said. After I quit coaching, I was the CCM rep for 7 years, so I stayed in the game. Yeah, it was fun, and I did all the NHL West, and I did the IHL, and so I got every GM and coach for the NHL were probably my left winger, my right winger, or was somebody that played. It was true. LA Kings, I think 5 years in a row. Fatorik was there. Brian Maxwell was there. I can keep going on that I'd go into the dressing room and I'd forget about my job. I'd be sitting with the coaches and the general managers talking, and Gretz was there too. So
yeah, Rick Dudley or Tommy Webster. They had a lot of
was there too.
WHA guys came through LA's coaching ranks.
Dennis,
as you know, as we discussed, I've been looking forward to talking to you, and it certainly was worth the time. I enjoyed watching you play very, very much, and I'm glad to see that you're doing so well now. Loved hearing the stories, and just wanted to thank you again for spending so much time with us on the show today.
Well, I hope they were interesting, and I do appreciate. I love talking about old times because it's fond memories for me. So it's kind of like I don't have too many people to talk hockey about. So I thank you too, Mark. I appreciate it, and good luck with the rest of them. They're all most of the guys are similar. They got a million stories. You just got to track them down.
Nothing like hockey players. I'm glad I tracked you down, Dennis, and we'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
Anytime, Mark. Appreciate it, and you take care.
You too.
Sorry about the Bruins.
Thanks. See ya.
But you got to share the cup, Mark. You got to share the cup. I mean,
I know,
St. Louis, 52 years.
Oh, I know. Honestly, I just prior to you, I edited my previous guest for this weekend's show is Wayne Babbitt of the Blues, former St. Louis Blues. Yeah. So obviously he was pulling for them. If any team was going to be the Bruins, the Blues were a great story. 52 years and without the cup, so it was good. And they deserved it. They worked their rear ends off. And for the Bruins, I always remind people they won 15 games in the postseason, and nothing to be ashamed about. But it's good to see the Blues really taking care of their alumni and sharing in the Stanley Cup with the former players, and it was a good situation all over. But I appreciate that. So
just knowing Berube just on being a player and buying into the system, and what a story. Bottom place, it'll be a story that some movie, you got I'm trying to think, Baldwin, or who was the owner of Hartford Whalers?
Yeah, Howard Baldwin, who coincidentally I just had
Howard.
They just had lunch with on Wednesday.
He'll be making a movie about St. Louis in about 10 years. He's into Hollywood, so.
Absolutely. I'm going to bring that idea up to him, actually. It is, it's like you said, it's something I don't think has ever happened to go from dead last that far into the season to number 1 overall is incredible and quite a story. So I'm glad you're still watching it, but more importantly, glad you're having a great time down there with your wife in Arizona. And again, greatly appreciate the time today.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, take care.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast, the voice of hockey legends. Just a reminder to please consider giving the show a rating and or review on Apple Podcasts. The link is in the show notes. These ratings and reviews help us become a lot more visible and make the show more accessible to hockey fans everywhere. I personally read all the reviews and greatly appreciate them all. If you have thoughts or suggestions for the show, you can contact us through our website at prohockeyalumni.org, or be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Pro Hockey Alumni. Thanks for listening.